Sí, ¿Octavio? No, Mauricio. Mauricio, vale. Yo sabía que... Homenaje. Eso está bien montado, ¿eh? Entonces.
Está emitiendo ya, ¿eh?
Sí.
Ah, sí. O sea, que la conversación que acabamos de tener sobre Eric Clapton, el Albert Shaw,
Pues sí, lo siento.
ha salido.
Nos ha quedado bien.
No habéis salido vosotros, pero sale el sonido.
Juan, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás?
Muy bien.
A ver qué charlita nos da. Estáis más orientados pues para la gente. Estamos ahí justo primer, segundo postdoc y que queremos dar el salto ahí y ver cómo lo orientamos. Bueno, ha venido.
Hostia. Estamos emitiendo lo que
Claro, porque como ya has empezado, ¿o qué?
Estamos emitiendo que me estoy tomando un té.
Es que no se ve nada. Ahora, ahí se ve. Ya está. Pero el grabar da lo mismo porque yo grabar luego lo corto. ¿Sabes? No me dio esto bien.
Whenever you Right, so thank you very much for everyone for being here today. I would like to welcome to our next event, the Spanish researchers, which is Climbing the Academic Ladder, How to Progress in Academia. I'm very happy to see quite a few faces from different constituencies. My name, for those that I don't yet know, is Alejandra. I am the director of the London constituency of the Spanish researchers. I would like to firstly thank our speakers for have taken their time from their busy schedules to come here today to share their knowledge and to enlighten us in the process of progressing in academia. I would like to thank you all, of course, for being here, and I would like to, before I forget, thank our sponsors for having, yet again, giving us the funds we needed to sponsorship some of our events, one of them, which is this one. And our sponsors were Ramon Aretris. And the last bit, I guess, I would like to thank the London Constituency Working Group, which are a group of people who volunteer their time and show their commitments to create events like this one. And they do work quite hard. So thank you very much. Without any more delay, I guess, I will go on to presenting the chairs, which we have here. Esmeralda Parra, who is doctoral research fellow at the MRC Clinical Science Center, she's there chatting, and Mauricio Suárez, professor of Lógica y Filosofía de la Ciencia in the Complutense University of Madrid, and Marie Curie research fellow in the Institute of Philosophy, School of Advanced Study in the London University. So thank you very much. Sit down and enjoy, and speak later.
Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here. It's a pleasure to be invited to chair or moderate this session. Really nice to see all this great cohort of Spanish researchers here. So what this session is about is it's about promotion in academia, and particularly we're going to be looking at grants, and we're going to look at the process of applying for grants, research grants, from both the perspective of those who apply for them and gain them, and also from the perspective of those who have to adjudicate them and give them. So grant takers and grant givers. So there's two sides to this session today. First of all, we're going to have two speakers giving us some of their experiences as researchers and academics. So that's the perspective of the grant takers, people who do apply successfully for grants, and both of our speakers have been very successful at raising funds from different research bodies. So they're going to tell us something about how they go about applying for these grants and getting these grants, and also what this means in the context of an academic promotion and progression. And then the second half of the event, we will have one person who is a program manager for a grant awarding body, who is going to be talking about the process from the other point of view, from the point of view of the grant givers, those who award and adjudicate grants. So every one of these three speakers today will speak for roughly 15 minutes. It's all very informal. They've accepted questions. They've told me that they accept questions and debate throughout their presentation. We'll also have 5 or 10 minutes of question time after each of the talks, so that you can address any particular questions particular to the speaker and their own professional development and so on. And then at the end, after those three talks, we'll just have a little bit of a round table discussion, where we'll just get everybody on the table. That is, the three speakers and the two chairs will come on the table, and we'll try to do something a bit more collective, see if we can extract some lessons and so on from the experience. So that's roughly the format. So the order we're going to follow, first of all, we're going to have Alejandra Tomas. Then we'll have Juan Martin-Serrano, and finally Ghada Zoubiane. In that order, and the first two, as I mentioned, are sort of experienced researchers, and Ghada, on the other hand, Ghada is a program manager for a grant awarding body, so that's roughly going to be the division of the event. As I just said, questions allowed at any time and interruptions welcome. So there are no questions about the format of the event. I will just proceed and introduce the first speaker. Okay, no questions? So let me introduce the first speaker, Alejandra Tomas. She's a biochemist. She trained originally for her first degree at the University of Valencia, which is in Spain. Then she took a master's course from, oh, I should say about myself, I've spent so long in the UK that I've been infected by the British sense of humor. I can't help it now, I'm trying to keep it under control. Then she went on to do a PhD in biochemistry from UCL at the Institute of Ophthalmology, which she's been linked to for a number of years afterwards. She was a research associate and a senior research associate there. She managed to raise some impressive funds to carry out her research, and most recently she's now been given a large grant to run her own group at Imperial College, where she's now the principal investigator of a new project in the section of cell biology in the Department of Medicine at Imperial College. So without further ado, Alejandra, first speaker.
Thanks a lot for inviting me to come here today, and please interrupt me anytime. I'm just going to show you a little bit of my experience. I have managed to do so far in academia, and maybe open a discussion with you. So, yeah, the talk is about climbing the academic ladder. So I don't know if climbing is the proper word or kind of hanging in there, academic ladder. But so the first slide is just to show that, in fact, climbing this academic ladder is a very difficult thing to do. So if you look from these numbers from the Royal Society, from the people that actually finish a PhD, there are only about, in the UK, about 0.35% that manage to get full professorships. So actually, if you are finding this difficult, this is because it's a very difficult thing to do. So it's challenging, and there are many ways in and out of it, and I think all of them are just as good, you know. So I think oftentimes you are finding that's a very uphill struggle. At least I found this an uphill struggle, and then you have to realize it is an uphill struggle. And, you know, there is an element of luck involved as well. So anyway, just a little bit about myself. So as Mauricio has said, I did my first degree in Valencia here, sunny, in yellow. Then I kind of moved to Paris to do a master's degree. And then from Paris, I came to London for the first time to UCL, managed to do a PhD at UCL. And actually, one thing that Mauricio has missed is that in between, I actually moved to Switzerland. So I went to Geneva and did a first postdoc, fairly long postdoc there, and had a little baby here. I kind of progressed a little bit in the academic career in Switzerland. I went up to senior postdoc level, and another baby came along. By then, I had 2 babies, and I wasn't, yeah, well, there was a point in which the academic ladder in Geneva didn't seem very straight. And also other things happening in my life meant that we kind of came back to London. And I was lucky enough to be able to come back to the same department in which I had done my PhD and rejoin another group in the department and carry on the same theme of research that I had been doing in Geneva. So I was very lucky. I continue the same project that I was doing in Geneva and do a complementary one in parallel. And so I did this in this lab here. It was until very recently, until March. It feels like ages ago. I was there, and it was a very profitable time. And in that time, I managed to write an investigator research grant and get it funded. So that allowed me to move to Imperial in March and start my own group there. So I now have a PhD student and a postdoc working for me. Weird, but anyway, yeah, that's where I am. So how did I kind of manage that? I think in the UK, if you want to progress beyond senior postdoc level, which is a big bottleneck, you need to get a fellowship at some point. So I just wanted to kind of share with you the little bit that I know about how you can go about getting these fellowships. So in the UK, you have different funding bodies. So you have research councils, you have charities, you have, for example, the Royal Society, and they will all have fellowship programs. So, for example, in my field, in cell biology or biochemistry, you would go about contacting the BBSRC or the MRC, or you would find charities like the Wellcome Trust. The best thing to do is to go literally on Google and kind of Google like MRC fellowship, and then there, information will appear, so you can then go in there and really find about these fellowships in detail. So I haven't given you much detail about them because actually you need to just go there and find it. But it's very easy. It's all online. So as you can see from this slide, and this is not supposed for you to read it, but just to have an idea that after you complete your PhD, then there are a number of fellowship applications that you can do, and the limit basically. In order to be able to apply for all these different fellowships, you need to be under certain years following your PhD. So there is a limit on the experience that you can have. So you need to have a good enough CV within that time frame in order to obtain this fellowship. But as you can see, there are fellowships staggered a little bit along all the way up to 10 years after your PhD. So you have different options. So the question is that you need to go in there and try and find which is the best one for you to apply, and possibly have a second option just in case the first one doesn't work, and just go through. Think about it. Recently, the MRC has changed this. The MRC person will explain much better later on, but they've changed this requirement for limit of years following your PhD. So I know for fellowship now, there is no more exact limit of years from your PhD, but still there is a requirement for different skills and experience that you must have in order to be able to apply for all these different fellowships. So the best thing you can do as well is go online, go to the fellowship page of the MRC and really look what they are looking for, and if you have questions, ask people like Ghada or email them, and just literally find the fellowship that will be most appropriate for your experience and your level. But anyway, there are also some other opportunities that I wanted to mention that are of a specific interest to women. And the reason I say this is because sometimes women are faced with extra issues that delay the climbing of the ladder. I think it's difficult for everybody, but maybe even more difficult for some people. So there is, for example, these L'Oreal Foundation grants that will cater specifically for women, and they give you fellowships of up to £15,000, and you have to have less than 10 years postdoctoral experience. But these grants can be spent for research, or they can also be spent in innovative ways to facilitate research, for example, for childcare costs. There is also this other fellowship from the Royal Society, Dorothy Hopkins fellowships, and I think in those, they are not specific for women, but they are for people that have need for flexible support due to personal circumstances, or maybe childcare responsibilities or other health issues. And female candidates are also encouraged to apply. So again, you could try something like that if you require them. Finally, I also wanted to mention this type of fellowships called career-oriented fellowships. So if you've taken a break from research, or you don't feel like you can do this all the time and you need to do something else for a bit, maybe, be with your family, or I don't know, you can then reapply some of these fellowships in order to re-enter the academic ladder. So this, for example, this Welcome Trust Career-Oriented Fellowship, which you can try. That's for postdocs that have taken a break of 2 years or more. So they need to have a 2 years postdoc experience prior to the break, and it will provide them with 2 to 4 years support and salary, consumables, and travel expenses. Also, these other ones, I mean, I think the best thing is actually for you to go to their websites and really read in detail, you know, the details of these programs and whether it would be, you know, something that you would consider. Because everything, all the information is on it. So, okay, so a little bit about what I did. So I actually applied for an MRC Investigator Research Grant. So this is supposed to provide you a route into a PI position from a senior postdoc point. So it has a limit of 10 years of postdoctoral experience, so you have to have between 3 and 10 years postdoc experience to apply. I don't know whether this limit is still like that or it will change.
We are pushing for it to change.
Okay, yeah.
So let's see.
I actually had 11 years experience when I applied, minus a month, but I could discount my 2 maternity leaves of 6 months each, so I was in the limit, just. I only had 1 chance though, because otherwise I was hoping. So you have to be in a first lecturer appointment, or have to have a junior fellowship that has already been given to you, or be a senior postdoc in order to apply. And you can request funds for your salary, for research, for staff, for consumables, equipment, travel, and there's no limit on the funding you can request. And the duration is usually 3 years, because the expectation is that during those 3 years you will identify a position that will allow you to apply for grants, like project grants, like in open competition. The but is that you need a sponsor. So basically, you need a strong letter of support from a host institution that will say that they will seriously consider you for a permanent position during the lifetime of your work. So you need to identify a sponsor that will support you with that. And to show their support, it's not only a letter they need to write, because you know a letter is kind of easy to write, but they need to provide at least 20% of your salary costs. So this, you know, means that the first thing you need to do if you want to apply for this is actually get a sponsor. And for that, I mean a university that will want to host you and pay for it. So I just wanted to comment briefly what writing the grant was, like the process of writing the grant, no? So first you have to have an idea, obviously. So you have to write a research proposal that's compelling, and it has to be adjusted to your experience, to your personal ability, and you need to find good mentorship and the right environment that will allow you to put together a believable project that can get funded. So the application for the NER is online, so in fact you submit it via this YES system, which is the same system in which you submit project grants. And I don't know if you've ever, maybe you all know about this, but you have to fill a lot of things. So basically, it's online, and you have a proposal form that you need to fill. So you need to give details of the organization that you want to work in, the title of your project, the start date, the duration, details about yourself, the objectives that you want to pursue, a summary, which has to be a layman language summary that can explain what you're going to do, a technical summary, another paragraph about the beneficiaries in the academic areas that you're working at, a communication plan, which means how are you going to communicate your results, which conference you're going to attend, how are you going to disseminate your findings, an impact summary about how your research is going to impact society and, you know, people like that. The resources that you're asking for, so how much money you're asking for, whether it's for staff, equipment, research. And then there are technical and ethical considerations. So if you're doing animal work, for example, you will need to give ethical, well, you will have to take into account ethical considerations and give a very detailed explanation about what you're going to do. Or if you have human participating in your research. And the reviewers that you propose. And then you have to put a number of attachments, actually. And they have a requirement, for example, they have to be written in font size 11, Arial, 2 centimeter margins. This must look silly, but when you're trying to fit it all in there, don't cheat. Basically, use 2 centimeter margins, 11 point, because they will get it back. It's like,
Yes, they will.
They will.
Otherwise, you'll have font
I
4.
sometimes use 1.98.
It's just to be fair to everybody, so that they have the same space. Otherwise, you will have font 4, and you have to sit there with the magnifying.
Yes, indeed. But I shall explain to you that some of them it's a bit challenging to fit them in the space. First, you need to put a CV that has actually a format that is very it's like a format you have to provide you. So in the case of the NER, you are the sole applicant. You are not allowed to have co-applicants for the NER. So for other grants, you are allowed, but for the NER, it's a personal application. So you provide your CV and a list of publications from one page. They also state how to do this. And then is the case for support. The case for support is the real project. So far, you haven't filled the real project at all. This is all other things that need to be. When it comes from the case of support, in the case of the NER, it's 8 pages long. You have to include a title, which has to be clear, concise, and to the point, but actually explain what you want to do. Then a paragraph about the importance of your research. Then a paragraph about, and then is the scientific potential. So first you start explaining about the people that are going to do the research, so you and your mentors or your collaborators or whoever's going to work on it. Then a little bit about the track record of everybody that's in there, and yours. The environment, so a little bit about the equipment, the resources that are going to be at hand in your institution. And then the research plan. So the research plan, you need to have an hypothesis, which you need to state clearly. Then you need to have the aims that you're going to attempt to achieve. And then an explanation of what you want to do and how you want to do it, the experimental procedure, and finally the conclusions you want to reach. And then you need to have some preliminary data that you can include in your application that shows that you've tried some of the things you want to do, and they should. You also need to add another page for justification of resources. So everything you ask, or the money you ask, then you need to justify that. Pathways to impact, which is a bit like impact summary, but more or something. I mean, yeah. By then you are completely Covering letter, we can explain what are your ambitions, what you want to achieve in your career, where are you going, why are you asking for this now. If you have project partners, which are collaborators, they are not co-eyes but collaborators, they need to give you letters of support. And a data management plan which shows how you're going to curate your data, how you're going to store it. And if you are collaborating with industry, you need to show an MRC industry collaboration agreement. And finally, but very importantly, you need a letter of support, like I said before, signed by the head of the department and the vice chancellor or equivalent, that shows that A, they are very much supporting you, and B, they are prepared to pay at least 20%. Very clear. At least. Yeah.
They can always offer to pay more.
Definitely. There's people that are lecturers and have their salary covered. There's people that are senior postdocs that don't have their salary covered. But you need at least that level of support. Otherwise, you cannot enter this particular scheme. I don't think for the fellowship is different, but
it is different. I think the new investigator is to ask the university to show the support, and so that when the NERC finish, they have somewhere they can go to. And that's the way the funders have agreed with the university, especially for the new investigator, not for others.
Yeah.
So it's almost a commitment from the university that they're not going to drop you after you finish your NERC. They don't like it, but
the university.
No, of course they don't like it. But I think this is the only way for us not to end up having loads of people with no position.
So anyway, yes, so they do have to commit. Then your NER will be assessed. So the assessment is a long process, takes about 6 months, and it's like like other grant applications, but they do take time. So the first thing that they do is subject your proposal to external peer review. So your proposal will be reviewed by specialist referees in the UK or international. And then there is a triage. So the triage means that all the proposals will be assessed. Actually, I think the decisions are made by the chair of the research board, but taking into account the feedback from the reviewers and from the board members, no? And then
there's a subgroup of the board that meet and look at the reviewers' comments, but they as well have input into the triage.
Right.
And the reason we do the triage because we receive at least 90 applications per round, and it would be good not to drag on those that we think may not be competitive on that day.
So basically, if you are out at that stage, that's it for you, but you will get the reviewer comments. So you can just dwell on those, examine those, and reassess your proposal. So it's not a waste of time. If you go over to the second stage, if you're lucky enough to pass the triage, then you go to the board meeting. And in that, the shortlisted applicants are allowed to respond to the reviewers. So everybody gets the reviewers' comments, and then you can have a response, which is 2 pages long, I think. Yeah. And then you need to be concisely answering every criticism that these reviewers will give you, and be just precise and to the point. And then they will take that answer into account in the meeting. So then there will be this board meeting, and I believe the NERCs are considered separately from all the grant proposals.
So the budget that we have is the same for all the grant and the NERC, but because we want to encourage new investigators, we give them what we call a strategic uplift, which means that when you are discussing the proposal, we allow if the project is not as strong as an independent researcher is. So when you are scored, this is taken into consideration.
Right.
So the way that it's assessed is gentler by the experts and the panel.
Yeah, because the assessment can be hard. I mean, so don't be put off by the criticism, because you will be criticized. So it's hard when you read it, but you have to take it on, basically. And then they will give you a number, and then you will either get funded or not get funded. And not everybody that goes to the panel gets funded by any means. The ones that get funded, that's very good. If you don't get funded, at least you will get the feedback from the panel about why this didn't work. And the good thing is that you can reapply once if you still fulfill the eligibility criteria, so you have to be under 10 years since your PhD. But you need to wait for at least 12 months between deadlines if you haven't been shortlisted for the panel.
So if certain NERC there's something small that the expert panel think that they don't want to fund it just yet because they don't want to rewrite your proposal. They may invite you less than 12 months if they feel that you can change it within 3 months. But generally speaking, the criticism that the expert will give will require around 12 months to work on them, and then to come back.
So I think I want to give you maybe an overview of how long it took me. So I started trying to identify a host that would fit me at around October or something like that. I found somebody, a group that suits me by December or something like that. January, I actually got interviewed by them to see if they liked me and my proposal. They decided to sponsor me by January. I started writing the proposal very seriously in January, but I already had obviously preliminary experiments that I was doing in the meantime. And I put it together, sent it in May. I got the panel meeting was in October, but in the middle I had the triage. I don't remember when, but anyway, it went through the triage. I got the answer from the reviewers. Then I had like a month to reply. And I went to panel meeting in October. They gave me the answer in November, I think. Then they still criticized my animal experience because I didn't have enough detail of the statistical analysis. So I had to rewrite all of this, resend it to them. They thought about it again, and finally, although it was preliminarily accepted, it was properly accepted in December. I started working on it in March. So what I'm trying to tell you is that you need to plan in advance. You cannot just say, I'm going to write a fellowship or something like that. You need to really think about where you're going, how many years you've got, what is your level at this point, which fellowship you should go for, and then maybe other more junior fellowships you might try before, because I went for the NET directly, but it might be perhaps better to go a little bit step by step, get a fellowship in. If it doesn't work, try another one, try here, try there, and then, if it comes back to you and is rejected, don't be discouraged, don't be demoralized. I mean, big people get grant rejected all the time. This is what I've learned. Like, big professors are like, reject, and then accept it. So it's okay. It's okay. Rejection is fine. Take it on board. Rewrite it. Reassess. Be resilient. So basically, keep calm and feel and just focus that, this is your plan. This is reality. The ups and downs, you will fall here. You just carry on, and then the fun is on the way. Just like, try wherever you can, basically, what can I say? And then That's the level I'm in. So the future, I don't. We'll try. I will carry on. I don't know. The next person will explain it. Anyway, anybody wants any questions?
Thank you very much. So we just have a few minutes for questions specifically directed at Alejandra.
I just want to congratulate you because the path that you've been through is the path that, it's the best path that could happen, because we ended up with a NERC straight after a senior postdoc and 2 babies, which I think is something you need to be very proud of. The other thing that I want to say is the people who actually assess the proposal are research experts, are professors. So that's something to keep in mind. It's not your admin people who look at it. It's those experts who look at it and criticize it. So although you may feel a bit disheartened about their criticism, these are people you will work in the future with them in the field. So think about it very carefully, because they may have something good to say, even though the first 15 minutes you just want to kill them. Don't kill the messenger, but it's something that it's worth thinking about, because I think these are people who have been to a senior position and they've seen it. And although it's hard to think about it, just think that there may be a point to take there. It's never very nice to receive a negative outcome, but as you said, keep on trying.
Can I ask you about all these research grants that you've been discussing? Are they all specifically for the medical sciences, or can people outside the medical sciences apply for some of them as well?
I mean, the fellowships here that the ones I know more about are very biomedical, biology grants. But I'm pretty sure there are fellowships.
There are. So there are 7 research councils. I think, Alejandra, you're doing my talk, so it's really great.
Sorry.
There are 7 research councils. Some of them are arts and humanities, social sciences, physics and engineering, infrastructure, as well as BBSRC-MRC. Wellcome Trust funds across as well. So there is a lot of disciplines out there beyond the biomedical.
Are you going to be talking about that?
Very briefly, yes.
Okay.
And there is the charities as well, so you should think about that as well. So Diabetes UK will be specific for diabetes. This is the private money. I guess they raise the money from the public, or
By the charities, you don't mean Oxfam?
I don't think Oxfam does fund research, but charities like the disease charities, so British Heart Foundation, Cancer Research UK, we have these disease ones. And whether it's the charity or the Medical Research Council, recently we have been encouraged by the government, but as well by the research, that we need to cross boundary in terms of discipline. So when you are working on a disease, it's very good to identify a telomere that does so and so, but you need to understand that you're working with a human being that has social needs and emotional needs. So a lot of these, what we call strategic initiative, what we're doing is we're working across discipline. So you'll have on a grant, a social scientist, a biomedical scientist, physics and engineering. And this is how we're going in the next spending review. This is what the Treasury wants us to do. But then I think it makes sense to look at the disease from a holistic perspective rather than just that little molecule.
There is indeed a program by the Wellcome Trust Fellowship of fellowship grants that supports fellows who does this link between humanities research and science, pure science
across
research.
the fields, no? Something like that is called, but there are specific fellowships as well that encourage.
And it's been very welcomed by the
Yes.
community.
I mean, in my field, the Wellcome Trust funds some of the most exciting history of science across the world.
They have that flexibility to go across discipline, which I think is amazing.
They're very good.
Yeah, I forgot to speak about the European grants, but there are also these FP7
and 6.
So
Especially for people who are from European countries, there's a lot of money in Europe. There is a lot, it's funny to say, but in research,
there's a lot of money in Europe. It's not all down there in the south. But
well, I do.
I mean, you can apply.
The UK does very well in getting Europe money. The UK does extremely well in getting.
That's correct. That's very correct. Yeah, and I can give an example. in a little bit probably about my work, but some of the European initiative and the demand from the UK researcher is amazing.
More questions, Edward?
I found really difficult to have the preliminary results.
Yes, this is
especially because you know when you are working in a lab and you want to move to another lab. I mean, exactly, to have funding, to have money to do the preliminary experiments. So how important is to have the preliminary results for a grant, for a fellowship application, or to have a paper behind you?
Yes, I think what you need to have is not exactly a paper on the grant, but a paper that shows that is like kind of in the field of the grant that shows that you can then do the grant. Does it make sense?
Well, but then, yeah.
In the past, you have to have papers that show that you can work in that field, or you've worked in something similar. But it doesn't have to be exactly about the grant, but you do need some preliminary experiments that you need to have the results so you can put them in your proposal.
Yes, I mean, I was talking to Susanna about this earlier, because when I was a researcher, I didn't know any of that, really. I would have benefited from knowing all of this information. The fellowships, I mean, Alejandra, you're a NERC, we expect to have preliminary work. When you have a fellowship, they come at different stages. Some of them give you a PhD. Some of the fellowship I'll be presenting, it's a PhD. Within that PhD, you're setting up the basis that you're building on gently and slowly. Even if you change area of work, but what you are doing, you're taking with you the methodology, the expertise. So your preliminary work starts from even when you're doing a master's degree, if you decide to do a master's degree, or a PhD and up. And some of the fellowship are a bit earlier stage, so they allow less preliminary data. When you become an independent researcher wanting to run a lab with hiring 2 people, then at that stage you do expect. So it really depends which stage you are at.
Well,
so in your case, you generated the preliminary data in UCL.
Yes.
And I suppose they were knowing that you were going elsewhere.
Yes.
Yes,
so
you were allowed to spend money on your own future and not.
This was extremely difficult for me, but it wasn't. I had an amazing boss at UCL, which was a big part of my success. And I also had, obviously, the host at Imperial was kind of giving me maybe some reagents that I could use, you know, but it was all like a bit like, try to do it on the side, on weekends or whatever. And this, because I was also obviously working on my project at UCL, writing the paper for UCL. This was extremely important because without the paper, I wouldn't have gone general either. So everything is like, very intense, but you need to try and manage some.
I would say my experience is that the papers on that stage are more important than preliminary data. So when I got my first grant as a PI, I had done a successful postdoc, I had publications there, and just to give you an idea, I think I had like 2 pieces of preliminary data which were, interesting experiments I had done through my postdoc and they were not published, and I wanted to build on that. But the reviewers didn't ask me to have, as much preliminary data as they would ask me now. For example, 10 years later, it's a different game. I mean, if you've done a postdoc, most of the times, most of the preliminary data is going to be published. And that was my experience at least. People didn't criticize me because it wasn't a no. You have to put something in there, but I would worry more about the papers than I would worry about the preliminary data while you are postdoc.
That's right, but also you have to find your niche or your area. So the other problem that you have is you cannot repeat what your head of or your PI, your boss is doing. Because if you're going to do exactly the same, that's not going to fall very nicely on your host institution unless you are changing host institution. So you need to find within that, within those papers, you need to find the area that you are going to focus and that your boss agrees that.
I change content,
Yeah. But if you're staying in London,
I agree.
Let's. This is a very natural point at which to change speaker. So, if you don't mind, we'll just invite Juan Martin-Serrano to tell us about what is it like 10 years later.
So I wasn't really sure how to approach this, but I think it's flexible, and improvise a little bit. So, so I think Alejandra did a very, very good job in introducing some of the key aspects of the academic career. One is, it is difficult. It is very difficult. But it's not impossible. And I think when I was in early stages of my career, I had been told what the challenges were. Actually, I was told when I was a student in university that this was very difficult, there was no future. I really liked biology, and I decided not to listen to that. Probably I was a bit fool at that time. But it's not impossible. You have to work really hard. You have to be very passionate about science, because otherwise you're not gonna, go through all this crap, if you don't love it. I mean, it's as simple as that. We see people coming to the labs doing PhDs who they like the idea of doing science, but when they see the reality of the scientist, by the end of the PhD, they say, this is not for me. That's fine. That's fine. There's paths for lots of different paths that are very interesting. So it is not easy, but it's very exciting. You like this. I mean, I don't regret it. Yeah, and it's been quite a while. The other point that Alejandra mentioned that I think is quite important is getting used to rejection. Not like you want to be rejected or most of your work is rejected. Yes, you get rejection sometimes in papers. You're ambitious, you go higher, in the kind of journal where you want to publish. You say no, well, that's disappointing. You have to try. Grants is even more difficult. I would say, to me, is the most challenging activity I do as a PI. Writing grants is the most stressful, demanding emotionally than anything else I do. You can never, ever submit a grant that is poorly written. It's the most important job, period. Without grants, there is no people, there is no money, you cannot. So this is crucial. I'm aiming here for people who are getting into the transition to PIs. If you are a PhD student, don't worry about grants yet. Worry about doing the best science you can and enjoy and work really hard. Really hard. So this is just a little of a brief introduction. I'm going to spend just 1 minute telling you what I do for a living. So I did my PhD on Madrid. I'll tell you in a minute. And I started working on HIV and how it works. And then I did a postdoc in which I basically studied how the virus gets out of the cell. Viruses like HIV, at some point, this is meant to be the membrane. They just get out. This is more like a lollipop that needs to be cut. And what I was working on during that time was identifying cellular proteins that basically mediate the separation of the virus. So I was officially a virologist. And then when I started my lab in London, my research took me in slightly different route, which has been very productive and very exciting. And this is basically to study how the same proteins that were involved in viral button are involved in cell division. And this is one of the reasons I'm mentioning this is the one thing I really like about science. I knew when I started my lab what I wanted to do at that point. Again, if someone had told me you're going to become someone who studies cell division, I would have said, well, no way, I don't even read papers about that. And actually, some of my best papers as a PI have been on cell division. And, sometimes you have to be brave and follow your instincts and do what you think is interesting. And you're wrong, well, try something else. That's why you have to work hard. So, education, I did my degree, as I mentioned, in Madrid, biological science, which is also in Spain. Universidad Autónoma de Madrid. I chose this university not because it was the closest to home and from Madrid, but I had a feeling, and I think it was so right, if I wanted to do molecular biology, that university was a bit better than the others in Madrid. And I don't think that was a bad decision. And then I did a PhD also in Madrid, I mean, the affiliation was with the Universidad Autónoma de Madrid, but I did it actually in a lab, in a hospital. From those of you who are from Madrid, is the Hospital 12 de Octubre, which is not it's not a high-profile research center. It's a very big hospital in which there is some research, but it's not like, the kind of places like you would flashy centers in Spain. No, it was a good lab, and I got good training and got a couple of papers out, and it was good. So you don't have to to basically work in specific places. It's about what you make out of it, I think. And obviously, it has to be a good lab. It has to be a good lab. But there are many around. So this is just a summary of my trajectory. And I guess, one temptation is to think that this is all outlined, that you do your PhD and then you have a plan and you say, oh, I'm going to go from here to there. And, in 10 years' time, I will be a professor. Well, that's not the case. It's very easy to talk like that and convince people that you are super smart and always knew how things were going to work. I didn't. So, in 1999, after doing my PhD, I went to New York. Why did I go to New York? Because I wanted to live in New York with my partner. She also wanted to live in New York, and we thought it was a great city. And of course, there's a lot of opportunities if you want to do science in a place like that. So it was great. And I chose a lab, but initially just because it was a Spanish guy who I met in a conference. So I thought, well, that's going to be comfortable. We'll speak the same language, and it's in New York, so that's going to be great. It was a complete disaster. It was a complete disaster. We had weekly meetings, and all it was about was, oh, what have you done this week? And I said, well, I've done this, this, and that. What are you going to do next week? And I would say, well, I'll do this and that. And he always would say, great, that's fantastic. Well, I thought, well, I'm so smart, So I felt good for a while. But then the guy was a bit of a cheat, and things went wrong. If you're curious, I can tell you a bit more in the pub. But luckily for me, the situation deteriorated very quickly. So I only spent there about 3 to 4 months. And I was extremely lucky because I went to the Aaron Diamond Research Center, which was across the street. I was initially attracted by a lab that had just published a paper in Science. So I thought, well, it's going to be good. And so I went to talk to this person, and she said to me, she was very helpful, and she said, based on your background, why don't you talk to this other guy who just started the lab? And, and I said, well, maybe it's too young, maybe, I don't know whether he's going to be good or not. But anyway, we gave it a shot. We met, and I think, as you said before, it was extremely important to have a really good mentor. My boss at that time, Paul Vinas, happened to be an amazing scientist. Well, a lot of people knew about him, and I guess I didn't. And, and it changed my career, basically. So choosing the labs is crucial. It's very, very important to work in a good lab with support, with people who care about you. Of course, it was a very challenging environment. We had to work really hard, but I really loved it. It changed my career completely. In the middle of this process, for me, there was the moment of truth, and it was in 2001. So far I had done okay as a scientist, publishing, not many papers. They were okay, but they were not great. And around 2001, we had a really good story, and we heard that there was another lab that had a similar story that was submitted to Cell. So basically, we had a very short time to finish our paper, send it to the journal. So I've never worked so hard in my entire life. I can tell you this. I would, my partner would leave a sandwich in the night table at night, and in the next morning there was no sandwich and there was no Juan. That was my life, for I don't know how many weeks. I just couldn't take it anymore. I had never worked so bloody hard in my life. There was nothing else. But that paper changed my career. We got our paper in a good journal.
on time, if you can be first or around the first, is important. It's, you know, sometimes it's unfortunate, but it's the business, you know. You don't want to be second if you can be first. You know, it's very, very important. So anyway, this was around 2001, around September. So some of you may remember there were 2 towers in New York that were destroyed. So this is where I was living in New York. So on top of this hard working, the emotions with September 11th, you know, we got our paper accepted without changes. Amazing. And I thought, well, this is it. You know, I've arrived. You know, I'm successful. I want to take it easy because I was dead. I was really, really tired, you know. And then I saw my boss keeping working really hard, pushing me for the next paper, pushing me for more results because he wanted to write a grant. And, you know, and I was just resisting to that. And I'm thinking, hey, I just got a paper, you know, a really big paper. Why should I, you know, keep pushing myself so hard? Well, and I thought, well, this is what I want to do with my life or not, because it's not going to be any different. And I had a bit of a crisis, I have to say, because, you know, you really have to want this. And as you can imagine from the rest of camps after, I did decide I wanted to do this. And it never got any easier. You know, it's just, you know, when you, then it's finding a job, keeping the job, grants, and then if you have certain ambitions, maintain your reputation or your level of publication. So it doesn't get any easier. So for those of you who think that by the time you get to lecturer or professor or wherever, that you can enjoy, you know, more free time, it's not like that. That's, again, why you have to love really a lot this career. And as I said before, a lot of people see that when they do a PhD or a postdoc and they decide that this is not for them. And that's fair enough. And this is not what we're going to discuss today, but there are many other options. So don't be obsessed. If you see that you don't want this, go for something else. Because, you know, if you it's clear in your mind that you don't want this, that you don't really enjoy it, it's going to be very difficult to be successful. And if you're not successful, you don't progress. It's a tough business, but this is how it is. So, as I said, you know, I had a good set of papers as a postdoc. It was, you know, it went very well, and I got a position as a lecturer at King's. And this was, you know, after 5 years as postdoc. Why did I come to London or King's? Well, because even though I really like New York, I also wanted to be closer to my family, to Madrid, to Spain, my friends. You know, I left Madrid when I was 29 years old, so, you know, I had, you know, most of my life was still there. So for me, it was like a good compromise between staying in a good, excellent environments, which there are in Spain, but we're not going to discuss them today, and, you know, sort of finding a better balance for my life. And that worked. Why the department where I went to? Because as a biologist, this was a new department with a leading figure who was starting to recruit people. And so I thought it was a great opportunity. None of this was planned. So when I went to New York, I told my mom, I'll be back in a couple of years. And I never planned to live in London or work in London. Actually, the first time I came to London was for a job interview. So none of this was really planned. Some people, you know, think you can plan things. I think in academia, it gets harder and harder to plan these things sometimes. If you want to stay in certain paths, I'm not going to say it's impossible if you don't change, but I think some mobility helps because you expand your opportunities, basically. So I started as a lecturer. And of course, the first challenge you get as a lecturer, or as a PI, is get your first grant. I had a little bit of startup money, but not really much. I couldn't pay a person or anything like that. So that was, you know, I had to write that grant while I was finishing my postdoc. And it was tough. In my case, it was a grant that was about continuation of what I had been doing. And as I said, it was easier for me because I was moving continent. My boss was staying in the US, I was coming here. So the overlap was a bit less of an issue, even though he had to write a letter saying that we were not going to overlap. And then, if you want to overlap, you overlap. You know, it's not a smart thing, but scientists should follow their instincts. And if you overlap with someone, so be it. I mean, you have to follow the best ideas, and you have to. I mean, I'm not saying you have to steal ideas or do other people's work. No, no, no. What I'm saying is, no one can tell you what you can do or you cannot do. You're a scientist. You are in control, and you know you're responsible for it. Choose the best projects, what you think is fascinating, what you would interest you. I'll discuss the grants in a minute, but anyway, I had a couple of good papers within my first 5 years, and then I was promoted to senior lecturer. And I guess the main factors that helped this promotion were papers and grant. I do a bit of teaching, not very much. University-King's, or at least my department, I mean, the teaching is important, but the promotion mainly comes through research, grants, papers. Even though they are trying to change that, but I don't think they put their money where they have their money. Because they say, oh yeah, teaching is important, but then if you get good papers, you were promoted faster. Okay? So, and as a senior lecturer, things went well. I got more grants, I got good papers, and I was promoted a couple of years ago to professor. So I guess that is considered a relatively or a straightforward career, successful in not a very long time. Is my life any easier now? No. But it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of stress sometimes, but you cannot lose perspective. So I wanted to discuss briefly publications. So I'm not trying to brag in here about publications, but what I'm trying to do is, of course, you need publications. Don't fool yourself. You need papers. Period. And if they can be in the big 3 or in the big 7, it's better than if they can be at lower levels. That has to be the aspiration. Okay, papers, papers, papers. As a PhD student, as a postdoc, and then when you're a PI, papers are very important. But not at any cost. The papers can never be wrong. Of course, people will, they always notice the flashy journals and all that. And of course, those journals, publications in those journals, always make a difference. But you don't want to be wrong, and you don't want to be, you don't want to fool your community. And sometimes people manage to do that in big journals. You don't want to be one of those, because then the harm is, there's no way back from that. So I can tell you that one of the papers I'm more proud of was this publication in Journal of Biological Chemistry, which is a good journal, but it's not a flashy one. But this was my first paper as a PI. It's not probably the paper I will remember, from my peers. It's an okay paper, but for me it was crucial to get a paper out, and to get a paper that was right. It was relatively modest paper, but it was very important to get your first paper out. And it's a different game. You've been a postdoc, successful in my case, and I guess if you get to this stage, you have been successful in one way or another. But it's a very different game. Now you're on your own. Now you're the guy who's going to write the paper. Now you're the guy who's going to deal with the reviewers, the guy who's going to decide what goes into the figure. Well, how do you write, how do you approach it? It's your paper, it's it's you. There's no one else. There's no going back to your boss and say, hey, how do we do this? It's your responsibility. So that was a very important paper for me. It's not what defined my promotions, maybe, but it gave me some confidence that I could do science on my own, and I could do my things, and I think that was very helpful for subsequent papers. And then you start developing, tools in the lab. You start training people. I mean, people is really crucial. So basically, you need to launch your lab to get going. And as I said, it's you, you know, it's no one else. So you need some recognition. So, and you need, I think it's very important that, you know, the community, your field, respects your papers. As I said, you have the flashy papers, or, you know, the ones with more impact, and the ones with less, and they are all important. You know, there has to be somewhere, someone in a different institution or in your field who's going to say, actually, he or she is a very good scientist. You know, there's no better person to judge your work sometimes than your competitors, because they read your papers, they reproduce you. So you need recognition. You know, you need some awards, but I would say this is crucial, but they help. I mean, I got studentships as PhD student, as postdoc. I had some recognition as a PI, as a young PI, or still young PI, and less young PI. So that helps. It's not something you plan. You know, you don't plan your career saying, I'm going to get this award. No, this is, you have to plan your work to do the best you can. But yeah, you need some recognition. For example, when you go from senior, I went straight from senior lecturer to professor, and the process is that, of course, you write an application that is reviewed by the university, and one key aspect of that application is letters that are asked to people in the field around the world, and what they ask these guys is, you know, to evaluate your work as a scientist. And so you need those letters. You need people to know who you are. And of course, you know, when you go to conferences, that's important to, you know, if you can give a talk in a conference, you have a chance, give it, talk to people, you know, make yourself known. Because, you know, we are not just papers, you know, we're people. And it's really important to start developing relationships with people in your own field or in other fields. So, yeah, at some point, someone is going to have to write letters or reviews about your grants. And it's important if they know who you are and they trust your papers, even if they are not in nature. You know, that's okay. You know, we can do that. What you cannot deal with is with, you know, with unreproducible papers. So, funding. I guess I can spend a bit more time here. I'm not going to discuss the different funding opportunities that there are. What I was planning to do was to sort of say what the main funding I've had over the years and what it means, or what it meant to me. So my first grant as a PI was from the MRC, and it was a career establishment grant. I don't think they do this anymore as such.
Not as such, no.
So what it was really good about this grant, and it's a pity that they don't have this anymore, is that it was a 5 years grant. They were difficult to get, but if you got one of these, basically it gave me the freedom to do my work for at least 3-4 years, in which I didn't think about money. I didn't have a big lab, but I had enough money to do what I wanted to do. And so that was really, really useful. Of course, there are 3 years grant, and they are very good as well. But if you have the opportunity to get, you know, 5-year grants or student or fellowships, they are great. They are great. And of course, if you are a postdoc, you know, to get these ones, you have to do is get a good publication record and write a good grant. As I said before, writing a grant is very challenging. It's a lot more difficult than writing a paper. Because in a paper, you know, it might be difficult to get to the results, to get the paper that is going to be, you know, this high impact publication. In a grant, what you're selling is an idea. And so, you know, you have to think really hard on how you write about those ideas. And it has to be doable. So basically, people have to realize that you are the person who can do that, because you've published papers in this field with these techniques. So, you know, suddenly you cannot come up and say, well, I'm going to do in my case, I don't know, neuroscience, I would have to justify it really hard. It would make my life very difficult. If you are too ambitious, you often get the criticism. I often get the criticism, oh, this is too ambitious. I don't think that's a particularly bad criticism, in my opinion. Because
not a criticism at all.
I mean,
what do you mean?
Well, some people don't like if you are too ambitious. So, and they say, well, this is too ambitious.
I think what they mean is that this is not realistic to achieve within the time frame that you have set.
But I'll give you an example of right. So, and if you are not ambitious enough, they will say it's boring.
Right. True. Which is probably worse.
And that's the balance. It's a fine line. So the way we approach grants usually is aim one is relatively safe. It's just turning the wheel and you know you're going to get something. May not be the most exciting bit. Aim two is a bit more adventurous. And aim three is just, you know, this is, I'm going to do this screen. I don't know what I'm going to get. Well, if it works, it's great. But if it doesn't work, I have aim 1 and 2. So you have to balance.
That's why you are successful.
So, you know, it's a tough one. So, for example, when this career establishment grant, it was to work on role of these proteins in HIV-1 body. If I had written at that time, I didn't know I was going to work on cell division. But if I had written at that time, I'm going to work on cell division and to propose what I then published, I think people would have said, no way, he doesn't have a track record in cell division. So it would have been difficult to get that grant. So it's a balance in which you propose something in which you are obviously good at doing. I think that's key. That is somehow realistic, but ambitious. And you cannot please every reviewer, you know. My first grant, I think I had 6 reviewers. 5 liked it, 1 hated it, and hated the way I wrote, hated everything about my grant and myself. I don't know. It was, you know, it was this, you want to kill. But, you know, those negative reviews, they are very dangerous if, let's say, if they expose a flaw in your grant, or suddenly someone says, well, actually, this is not feasible because this guy didn't think about this and this is not possible. That can kill you. But if it's just, you know, some kind of, I don't know, random crap that they throw at you, if it's balanced by other reviews, I think you can get grants with 1 negative review, okay? So anyway, I'm not sure what I was going to say, but it was a very important grant. It gave me money for 5 years. And it made a massive difference in my career. And at some point, yes, I decided to use my freedom within these 5 years and do all the things. And then when you come back to the funding bodies and say, well, I haven't done everything I said I was going to do, but I've done this and it's really cool, and if you look at this paper, they usually don't have a problem with that. What I find stressful about grants is, well, I have everything about grants, I find it very stressful, basically. There's this moment when you get the grant, which is relief, amazing. When I got this grant, I'll come back to this, it was the same week that Spain won the World Cup. I was drunk for 3 days, literally, you know. When you get the grant, it's like such a massive relief. But then you get stressed again the first day that you start spending money on the grant, because basically the clock is ticking. And then you know that by the end of this grant, you're going to have papers to justify the money that they're giving you. So when they give you an opportunity like this, it's great, but it also puts pressure on you because basically you have no excuse, and that is stressful. Okay, so I'm not going to hide it. It's, you know, it can be very stressful. So anyway, when I finished this grant, in the middle of this, I had this Lister award, which is also a grant, which was very helpful. You have to be within, I think, 4 or 5, but there's a period of time after your PhD, and so it's basically for people who haven't been long as a PI, and they have publish something good during this time. What it was really good about this grant is that it was a flexible money. It was £200,000 that I could spend any way I wanted, and I could change my mind. Obviously not in my personal account, but you know, if I said I'm gonna buy a machine and then I change my mind and I hire someone, I could do that, and that was very helpful. Why was that helpful? Because even though, you know, this period had been very successful in my career, when I applied for renewing that money, I had to now deal with the big guys, because this was for a young scientist. Now I was a senior scientist. Basically, you are in competition, you are not treated differently. I went ambitious. I had a chat with the MRC, with a grant officer at the MRC, and I said, well, it's based on this track record, which size of grant should I go for? Because that's the other thing. You decide what size of the grant you go for. You're gonna go for 3 people, 5 years, 1 people, 3 years, and that makes a difference. Where is your gamble? How do you think you are that you can do? If you think you can manage with more, you ask for it, but then that puts more pressure on the grant, because the people in the funding bodies are going to say, this guy's going to ask for £1 million. It better be good. If you're asking for £300,000, it's not quite the same game. So those are decisions you need to make. So when I applied for this the first time, I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I can tell you that the anxiety levels that I went through were, you know, I think it's been probably one of the most stressful times of my career. I had the least of money to cover my expenses. So but then I had a limited period of time in which I had to get money because I had people working for me as jobs. So it becomes, tough. The MRC invited me to reapply, and basically going back to listening to the feedback, this is crucial. They invited me to reapply, and you have to take the comments on board. And it's not you're not in the mood of taking comments on board because they didn't give you the money. So your first reaction is to be pissed off about it and say, they are all idiots, they don't know anything about this. You have to swallow that, all that. I mean, it might take you a few days or maybe a few weeks to, calm down. And then what you have to say is, how am I going to address these comments in a constructive, clear, and questionable way? So I did that. I went back. It was a bit of a smaller grant. I think part of the issue was that when my first grant was submitted, it was basically when the economic crisis hit, and suddenly the MRC budget shrank a little bit. So what it was feasible 6 months before, it wasn't anymore. So you can get a great grant, but you're competing in one day with whoever has applied, and if you could be very good, but if there are 5 other people who are better than you, they will get it and you won't get it. So it's tough. So you have to recover from that and come back. And it's always, I think this is the underlying thing. You have to deal with rejection. I'm not going to say that you get rejection always, but it's important to deal with that. So anyway, that was funded, and that was great. So that's kept part of most of my lab until this year. And in between, I got one of the last project grants from the Wellcome Trust. So the Wellcome Trust used to have project grants on fellowships. Fellowships are it's for people, grants is on the project. And they stopped doing projects. And that actually has put, I think, more pressure on the MRC, because people who basically, to get fellowship, you have to be really on top of your game. But to get projects, I think the challenge is a bit less. It has to be a good project, and you still have to be the person to do it. But the level of difficulty was a bit lower. And it's a pity that the Wellcome doesn't do these projects anymore. But anyway, I got one of those, and that was great. And the one thing that I think it was interesting about this grant as well is that my colleague and partner, Monica, she was a senior postdoc at that time, and she was a co-PI in this grant. And I think that helped her. So sometimes you can also be a co-PI if you're a senior postdoc. You can be co-PI in a grant. and then that can help you in your future career. So that was I think a good thing for both of us. And then what basically now funds most of my work is the Senior Investigator Award from the Wellcome Trust. And what if this was difficult, this was a little bit more difficult. So the way it works, and this is what the Wellcome Trust has sort of is becoming, is basically what they say is, we just want to fund people. So it's about you as a scientist, and the application is 3,000 words. So basically you have to outline, in this case I asked for 3 positions, 5 years, and you have to outline that in 3,000 words. I think I spent nearly 4 months writing those 3,000 words. I'm not exaggerating. I wasn't working all the time on this, but just thinking how you're gonna aim it, what direction you're gonna go, what approach you're gonna propose. Every single word has to count for you. So, you know, I thought, I think I have a chance of getting one of these. I could have said, am I going to put myself through that or just go for a slightly easier route? I went for this. It worked. I don't regret it, but it was tough. You know, it was tough. And the process here is a bit different. So what you do is you write these 3,000 words, and which basically they have to distill the best of you research for the next 5 years. And then this is submitted to there's a triage group at the Wellcome Trust who will say, well, this is good, this is not. And if they say it's good, they will send it to external review. And then there is an interview. And there is, in the interview, basically, well, I was scared when I thought about it, because you have, you know, people from like Paul Nurse, Tony Hunter, you know, famous scientists from all over the world, basically in this panel. And the interview consists of 5 minutes, no, 10 minutes talk and 20 minutes of question. This talk, if you ever have a chance to go for a fellowship application interview, is very difficult to prepare. Very difficult. Why? Because you cannot go over limit. You know, they get for this one they say you have 3 slides. So basically no animations. We're used to slides, animations, and you have to do the best possible job in there. So, you know, no matter how senior or junior you are, you have to prepare this. You have to do mock interviews to get prepared for the odd questions that they're going to throw at you. They are very unpredictable in interviews. I'm not going to say they are unfair. I think they're quite fair, but they are unpredictable. They can ask you about anything that's in grant or anything that's outside the grant. And so, you know, it's very important to have support in your institution. Even, you know, the head of my division, people who are very serious in my college, they all prepare this talk. They all seek help from colleagues to do mock interviews, to have rounds of questions. So it's very important that you have support, that you prepare these interviews. Okay, it's crucial. Do not, you know, go there unprepared. That is a killer. You have to show that you're good and that you care and that you're doing your best. And one thing they tell you at the Wellcome Trust is that some very famous scientists have failed these interviews because basically they take that as a given. They go walk into the room thinking, well, I'm this and that, you owe me this. You don't get it if you go like that. So everyone has to prepare this like there's nothing else in the world, basically.
Thank you, Juan. We're going to have to bring yours
to
an end.
It's actually going to be the end. So, and that there's one point I wanted to, I think, make about grants, which I found that it was very, very important in my career, actually. Identify, so for any grant, any application that you send, identify at least 1 or 2 colleagues who are going to read your application. This ideally should be colleagues with the freedom to tell you, I don't like this. don't find just people who are going to say this is great, no matter what. So, you know, and give these people the grant with enough time to give you feedback so you can actually improve the grant. So we don't do this on our own. Of course, it's your grant, it's your baby, and you put a lot of work. But you know, like 2 or 3 weeks before the deadline, when it's complete, you send it to a couple of good colleagues, and you ask them. And you know, sometimes I get from them saying, "This is rubbish. I don't like this part. Why? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense." And then you say, "Well, either I didn't explain it very well, or it's rubbish." So you have to, you know, seek that feedback. It's very important. You know, you cannot improvise when you write a grant. You can't. You know, it's very dangerous. So identify people who are going to read your applications, no matter whether it's a fellowship to do postdoc or to, you know, to get, you know, an award. It's very important. So I think that's all I wanted to say. So this is where some of us work. There was a time in which we were bigger than the shark, but you know, that has changed a little bit. Anyway, my email address is here. If you, I'm not sure you can see it, but I'll be happy to, you know, to talk to you in the future if you think it can be done.
Okay, thanks very much. The last speaker, Ghada, she needs to leave at 1:30, I think. So what we're going to do is to just let you speak first, and then we move on to the roundtable. So any questions for Juan, just write them down, and you can ask him afterwards. So this is Ghada Zoubiane, who is program manager for the infectious diseases at the Medical Research Council, and she's going to tell us everything about how to get a grant.
Not really sure if I can tell you everything how to get a grant. I can definitely try my best to share with you what I have learned from being at the MRC since 2008. Before coming to the MRC, I did my PhD in Manchester. I came all the way from Lebanon with a passion to do science and research and not to go doing anything else. I dropped fiance, I left my family, and I moved to rainy Manchester from sunny Lebanon. And 4 years were wonderful. I had a great PhD, I published, I was really enthusiastic about it. I moved to London, I went to the Institute of Cancer Research to do my postdoc. That was a disaster. I had a line manager who actually decided that if you don't show her the result that she wanted, she's not going to talk to you. Literally, she wasn't going to talk to you. So she disappeared for days and days. And this is where I made my first mistake of not packing my stuff and moving to somewhere else. But I persevered. That was the wrong type of perseverance. I should have moved. After the 3 years postdoc, I decided this was too much of a bad experience. So I need to really think my priorities. I've sacrificed too much to come all the way to here, and I haven't had the publication that I wanted for my postdocs. So I thought I still love research, but I really can't face the whole grant and publication perspective. So I went and worked in a biotech company at King's College. This is where I actually, the best two things that I have achieved from that is I met my husband and I met Susanna. But the third thing as well is that it was a different way of pressure, because in a biotech, they're there not only for publication, although we were allowed to publish with the King's people. However, it was what are you gonna generate that will give us money. The CEO was a money bomb machine moving around. All what he wanted is to generate money. And I enjoyed it for 3 years because I was allowed to do the research that I was doing without the pressure of publishing. But at the same time, they expected good results, which I think we have delivered. The biotech was so successful that it was bought by a big company. But luckily, before that happened, me and my, at the time, boyfriend thought, well, it's a bit too dangerous to be in the same place. If that goes haywire, we both don't have jobs. And then I thought, well, you know what, let's see what I want to do with my life, because now I wasn't sure, should I move to AstraZeneca, where I have a big project there, should I do something else? And haphazardly, I just applied for a program manager position at the MRC. I had 2 days of grueling exams, presentation, writing. It's not as bad these days. And I got it. And this is where the decision was, shall I actually leave the bench work and go into science management or not? That was the most difficult decision I had to make, because I was almost like turning my back to whatever I wanted to do in my life. But I can tell you, there is no way that I regret my decision. That was the best thing I've done. I meet fantastic researchers. I read about a lot of the research and get the excitement, but I do management, which turned out to be something that I'm strong at. And I come at my weekend to talk to a lot of Spanish people, which I think is really great, rather than being, for me, stuck in a lab looking at one molecule. But at the same time, I meet fantastic people like yourself who made it. So there is an alternative life if you decide you don't want to be on the bench, and it's a happy one too, by the way. So moving forward, and I hope you can just ask any question you want. Is everybody here of scientist background or other research? And PhD students? Okay, anyone who has put a grant and has been successful? Unsuccessful? So for those people who don't know the Medical Research Council, and I'm here really off duty, so you can criticize the Medical Research Council, I won't take it at heart. Nobody knows where I am on Saturday today, so I'm not really coming with the banner of MRC. The MRC is one of 7 research councils. And in case you don't know, the Research Council, every 5 years, they have to put a proposal to the Treasury to say, we want money to fund research. So like the scientists who get stressed about grant, we get stressed about putting that business case. And we're competing with money to build bridges, to build building, anything that the government may think is a good win. Science and research is never a good win for them, because it's a long-term project that they can't see in the next 10 years what it will do to you. So our job at the office is to say, look, if we do fund basic bacteriology, in 10 years, you will get saved that much for the NHS. It's not an easy task. That's why we ask for your help for impact. Because if you can help us generate impact on the long run, we as scientific background, but we still have to go and convince Vince Cable that that money that you're giving us is worth investing.
Not anymore.
Well, the
No,
new one,
Vince
John
Cable.
Johnson, the science. Apparently, he's a. Well, we'll see.
So how long? How many
Every
times?
5 years.
Every 5 years.
Every 5, and it could be every 3 years, and they don't give you much notice. So now we're preparing for the next spending review, not knowing, now we have a new government, when we're going to be called in to convince the Treasury that we're worth the money, that everything that we spend, the £700 million a year that we spend on scientific research, is really worth it. So keep putting the money there. So we as MRC, and I say we because I'm a program manager there, we fund anything from the basic end all the way to the public health end. So it's a wide range of research that comes. And in order for us to deal and handle this amount of research, there are different ways of doing it, either through what we call the board, which is what you have your money from. And these are like 4 different boards that look at either the cell molecular biology, or look at infection diseases, or population medicine, or the neurosciences. There are 4 boards that meet 3 times a year and look at proposals that we receive. But in addition to that, there are loads of other funding schemes that is worth considering and not dismissing. You have the whole fellowship and capacity and training, but you have what we call calls. Call that means that we as funder, we identified, for example, which is what I'm working on at the moment, antimicrobial resistance as being a problem. You may have heard in the news, all the antibiotics are going to be useless, we're all going to die from infection. This is what we believe, that having new antibiotics in the pipeline is an important thing. So this is a priority for us. And in order for us to tackle that priority, we decided that we're going to take some of our money, ring fence that money, and put it in certain calls where we want to bring the community to tackle a specific area. When there was the Ebola pandemic, this is exactly what we did. We want researchers to work within that area. So you could be lucky and you could be working in that area when you're needed, but at the same time, there are always calls happening, and there are always diseases happening, unfortunately, and there are always areas where you can find your niche that you can fit in. So in addition to the normal board, keep an eye for things that happen, that are not your traditional model funding. What do we do? Well, we definitely, like every single organization, we have a strategy, and that strategy, if you read it, is so general, it fits everything and anything. So it suits us to the bone, because then we have the flexibility to work within that strategy. But at the core of that strategy is supporting our scientists, supporting them in the way where we can make sure that we get the next generation leader of the future. This is by good research, but at the same time being the right environment. Because we're here in partnership not only with the PI, but with the research institute that you are working in, with the university, that are the university that will actually nurture you and help you develop your skills. And have their own requirement, as Imperial does, because I link with Imperial a lot, and a lot of the people there who are trying to establish themselves, it's quite a tough life, isn't it? And you have to publish, and you have to show, you have a probation period. So it's not only ourselves, but it's quite a few players within that field that have that impact. This is just a bit of summary, just to tell you within a year what we do. So currently, MRC has a different way of supporting research. We have our own unit and institute where actually a researcher can come and apply, and there will be MRC employee. This is not a grant, this is like an employment within MRC. So we have these unit and institute where we support 2,500 staff that are at early career development. We have 1,200 live grants as we speak. We support 1,900 students and more than 200 fellows. That doesn't include those that are on grant. These are the fellowship that are giving, or the studentship that are giving to university or the institute that we are running. As it was mentioned before, we had a line that I'm very happy that we finished from, where we said after your PhD, you need to have 3 years to get this fellowship and then 4 years to get this fellowship. It was a nightmare for us, because then you're sitting there on the telephone with the fellow calculating how many days they have taken off maternity. It's a silly way to do it. It was a way that was set up, and now the MRC, after a long review, thank God, changed that, where we're looking more at the, more like you're educated to get your PhD. PhD becomes like a training, then it will be the middle type of training, and then there will be the more independent, more senior training. We're trying to divide it into area, regardless how many years of PhD you have, because we realize that you could start with one area of discipline and then decide you want to move to something else. So you're starting with a new areas that you may have 4 years doing something else, but now it's about time to move. You might go to industry, and in industry you might actually work for 4 years, which actually doesn't actually work towards how much you're doing in academia. So we're trying to make it a little bit looser, and we're hoping and pushing to do the same for the NERC, for the new investigator, because I think that will make a lot of sense. 10 years to 11, 12, you know, life is not a straight line. At the end of this presentation, I have put the different schemes that we have. If you find it useful, I can go through it, but then I can leave them in the side, and if you want to circulate it, it could, because this is what's already on the website. But I just want to go more towards applying for grant and what's the best way to do it. So here we have, as I said, the MRC unit and institute where we hire a lot of our postdocs, and then they become into researcher and independent researcher. And this is all across, and it's really good to be in these units, because it gives you some flexibility in terms of time and in terms of progression. We have, of course, the student, and we give lump sum of money to a lot of the students within the UK to give them. But at the same time, we have students through our centers that we fund, through our partnership grant we fund. So there are different ways of funding studentship. We have what is like considered the early career fellowships. And these are very important, because every now and then we do a review to see what are the areas that we think are important. Recently, bioinformatics or biomedical informatics is considered as a priority. You know, bringing the statistician into the area of biomedical research, data sharing, data curing. So that's all part of certain skills that we identified as a gap in the UK that we want to develop. And a very recent one that has been published is interdisciplinary research, encouraging biomedical researchers to work with social scientists. That's a gap. And now we identified that there will be a lot of added value of working together, because any problem is tackled in a different way. So that we are encouraging that. We have specific money for this area. And I think it's worth, if someone is working within biomedical science, just to see whether there is an opportunity there. Of course, you can be postdocs on a grant. You can be a new investigator grant, as we said. And I think the fellowship that you had 5 years is now what is called CDA, which is Career Development Award, which we are giving it for 5 years as well. And these are intermediary type of fellows, which is still very competitive. Remember, the success rate on these fellowships could be anything from 13% to 20%. Could be as low as 10 in certain years. So that's not really a very high success rate. And all the fellowship have interviews and there is a panel. But it's really amazing to see what comes out of those fellowships that we fund, and I'll get to that. And as you progress, then you can have grants, and then you can go to the more senior fellows, which will give you $1.5 million over 6-7 years, and you have a whole lab. And at that stage, you're probably a professor. So there are loads of stages, and we're not only in that. Wellcome Trust have as well their own path, BDSRC have path, and other charities as well. So it's worth keeping an eye, looking on the website, but picking up the phone and talking to someone like myself and say, I'm at that stage, what do you advise? And that person will say to you, MRC may not be the right one, why don't you go there? We have launched on our website an interactive framework. It's a map where you click and you say, I am a clinician and I have a PhD, what can I apply for? And it gives you the options. And we think it's quite a good one because then you can get directed to places that you didn't know existed. This is all within the MRC. You can go and play around with it. It's actually fun. Or your slide, or we both stole the Royal Society slide. And the message is there that actually half of us may decide that we want to have a career outside science. My husband is currently in medical communication. I don't consider him doing research, but he's enjoying it to the bits. He likes the marketing bit. He's a scientist, and he has a PhD, and he loves the science. I decided, well, you know what, medical communication, medcom, that sort of marketing, he liked that. He works with a big pharmaceutical company. When there is drug outside, they do all their actually marketing. He enjoys it. We can start and do some of the early postdoc and then decide this is not for me, go out, work for the MRC, work for Xmidgen, I don't know if it exists, AstraZeneca, etc. Then you might change your mind and go back into research. So I think even that map is simplified because there's a lot of arrows that keep going left and right. And there are those who actually persist and become professor, which I think is really worth the effort for them to reach this area. But I want to show something a little bit positive because we've been talking about how difficult it is. And a work that we have done recently where we took our clinical research fellow who took a PhD with us, and it was a fellowship that I've done. And there was a specific guy who became a professor. He decided to track down all those who have taken a fellowship at the same time as him within the year. So it was a lot of LinkedIn search, Google, telephone. Basically, you're shadowing people and trying to find what happened to their life. And what we found that actually, these clinical research fellows, 38% of them are professors. That's fantastic compared to the 0.45. So that tells you if you have the right fellowship within the right environment, you do have a good chance of succeeding. So it's important to choose the right fellowship or the right research grant. And I repeated that for population health scientists. And I found that 85% of those who took population health fellowships are still within science research. That's a lot. We found that one person is in jail now, but the rest I don't know what he's done. I think he was a clinician and did something, and it was a bit of a surprise.
He's not a professor.
Not anymore. He's a clinician. I think he did something wrong with the prescription. But I mean, most of them were really successful. So it was really quite a joy to see that what you support now, the people that you interviewed now in 10 years, they made it there because of that amount of funding and the nurturing of that fellowship that it provided for you. So it's not as bad, unless you're in jail. So what actually make it easier or more difficult to get a career in research? Actually, funding is a good and a bad thing. If you don't get it, it's a blocker. If you get it, well, it's a blessing, but then you have to prove it. Advice, and this is important. When I was doing my first postdoc, someone should have come and told me, move on, change. You're not getting anything out of that. Why are you banging your head there? I didn't get the right advice. I didn't seek the right advice, but I didn't get it either. Everybody was working hard, so I worked hard. didn't get me very far within that postdoc. So career advice is very important. A lot of the universities now are more tuned to that. And a lot of the people who are senior are there that can give you advice. They don't have to be your line manager. Actually, it's better if they are not your line manager. Go to somewhere else and say, what do you think? This is my career. What do you think with that? Lack of job security and availability. Yes, in this area, there is no job security. Even for us working in the government, tomorrow the Conservative might decide to cut our budget with the ad for our job. There's no security in general. But it's always good to put in the back of your mind a backup plan in case things don't work out. Definitely, having 2 babies and doing research is not going to be easy, but you're doing very well. In my case, with 1 baby, it's working quite well with the MRC. So look at what you like, what works for you. And at the same time, you need to be proactive. You need to go look. You need to be banging on door and asking. It doesn't have to be physically door, but phone calls, email, all of that. And the same thing that could block you could actually enable you, because the way you approach the advice, your way that approach your collaboration outside of your own research institute, the better it is. Collaborators are as important as papers sometimes. It's who you know and whether they're going to come and support you doing certain area of research that you may not be an expert in. So fellowship, more than just a grant, yes, it gives you the money, it gives you the time to do research, it gives you the connection, and of course, it allows you to give some independence to do the research you want, and it gives you recognition, and enjoy it, because early career fellowship, as well as mentioned, is the time to enjoy the science. You have these 3 years, but after 1.5 years, start thinking what you want to do. Don't leave it until the last year. What do I want to do after 1.5 years? And let's work towards that target. I mentioned before that we changed our fellowship scheme. We're a bit more flexible. You can work as part-time, of course. We give parental and sick leave and a lot of mentorship as well. There's a lot of scheme for that. I'm going to move through that. This is our CEO, in case you don't know him. Sir John Saville, he's the Chief Executive for the Medical Research Council. He's still Vice President of Edinburgh University, so he comes 3 days to London to lead us, and then 2 days in Edinburgh. He's a great researcher and a clinician, and he brings that aspect of he's still doing the actual research and applying for grants, which is quite nice. He's very keen on new investigator research grant, and we always keep an eye when we have rounds of board of funding that the new investigators are always funded. They don't always make it up to the higher of the ranking spreadsheet, but we always make sure that they get that strategic uplift, so that we give them the opportunity and give them that chunk of money that they would have lost it if they're competing with the big researchers. And the Daphne Jackson, which is a charity, which a lot of the researchers are putting money in it, MRC is putting money in it as well. And we have currently 3 that we support per year, and we're going to increase it to 6. This is not only for women, this is for men and women who actually would need a career break to care not only for their babies, but for an ill person, or they decided they need to have a break. It sort of bring them back into the research and help them to be as competitive as the other fellows. And we have a lot of those people who come, 7 out of these fellows, they remain in the research for at least 2 years. So they actually go back into the system. They had these like rehabilitation, if you will, for 2 years, where you just go back into that system and be as competitive. This is a great opportunity. I didn't know about it when I was a researcher, but welcome, just have, and now we're introducing a little bit more at the MRC of that. So I think there are opportunities there. As an employer, we have our units and institutes, and we have a strong cadre of people that will actually, they have the time and the flexibility to look at the investment that we're giving them to do research. And the way we do it with university or university unit, as we call them these days, is we give them money and we assess them after 5 years. That 5 years gives everybody the chance to develop their project and program. When they progress, we kick them out, for the reason that you shouldn't feel too comfortable in a place and decide not to move. Moving around in research is good for your career, it's good for your CV. Because when you come applying for jobs, someone's going to say, well, he's been too comfortable in a place for 7 years. What would that grant that we give them will add to what they already have? You hear that all the time on the panel. Moving around, although it's difficult for personal reasons, It's not a bad thing. If we come without, have collaboration, move out for 1 or 2 years and come back, there are ways to work around it. How to win funds and influence the panel. Right idea, right funders. It's very frustrating when you're actually applying for the MRC and in your proposal it says, this BBSRC options. No, you're not applying to the BBSRC. Just make sure you're applying to the right award holder, funders. Look at their remits. You've done that?
That can be very confusing. I can tell you of experience we had last year.
Yes.
A colleague in my department applies for a grant to the MRC on the subject subdivision, things like that. She gets, this is we have outside of our remit.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, I received a grant to review on exactly the same subject from the MRC.
From the MRC. So the MRC
it was very difficult to understand.
For basic science, the MRC remit is stretchable. I have to admit that. It's more stretchable than for BBSRC. If it is looking at any human disease, it's out of the equation. It's easier. For the MRC, it's more stretchable. It's more stretchable at certain boards than others. I think we do recognize that. And I think what now we're looking at is we'd rather duplicate with BBSRC rather than have people going through the gap. So I've just accepted a proposal coming to actually immunity board. It's telomere, it's very basic. So I went to my colleague at the molecular cell biology. I said, BB are not going to take it because it says human disease. We need to work it out between us. Which board would it have a better hearing? And she said, it's probably molecular cell biology, but let's invite someone from IIB to look at it. These actually take a lot of our time, but that's the best way to ensure that grants do not drop between these gaps and who wants to take that. So I think hopefully it's getting better, I'd say.
The one thing that was, I don't know if there's anything to improve this process. It would be helpful if that happens, if let's say the MRC transfer to the BBSRC. The process in this case was to wait for another round, which means 6 months delay. That's a killer for someone who's trying to start.
I do think that will be the best thing to do. At the moment, I think the system doesn't allow it. We're bound by a system that we hate, the JEST system. We didn't have a choice about it. It was
there are cases in which
forced on us.
It does damage to people.
It does damage to people. So I think I usually prefer to take it if I have at least 50% MRC in it, and then seek BBSRC help for review, because I don't want the person to be waiting for another 6 months. It doesn't always work that way, but I think that's what we try to do. But there's a lot that we can do to make it. So the idea, you identify the remit, hopefully you talk to the program manager, and in plenty of time, don't leave it just before the deadline, because then you will lose some time. And look at the eligibility criteria. It's a bit more flexible with the fellowship now with years, but it's good to know which fellowship am I going to be applying for, an early career or a more advanced fellow. The process, which takes 9 months that you've portrayed, it is usually what it is. It's the process where you go to external review, come back, shortlisting, response from the PI, sometimes interview, sometimes the board will take it. There are other areas where we have a more speedy response depending what we want. I have currently a call where the applications that are coming for antimicrobial resistance, they're coming deadline of 4th of June. We're looking at them in September with an answer. But in order for me to do that, I have a 40 member of a panel looking at them, so they're almost doing the review. So certain areas we have some flexibility, other areas we don't. So it's always good to see, because not all of them are 9 months. But those that go through the board, it is a 9-month process and 3 times a year. So start early, because everything takes long, and not only your application, it's what actually your university, the signature of the university is very important. To talk to the university, make sure your finances are right, they're put under the right heading, and the university is the one who's going to be clicking the final button to actually apply. They're applying on your behalf. You submitted the application. The application will need to have a clear hypothesis. I do write feedback after every board. Maybe other funders don't. BBSRC may not write as many feedback. They prefer to take the reviewers' feedback. But we write feedback so many times. It's like there's no clear hypothesis. You need to let those people who are around you, your friend, critical friend, to look. Do they understand what is the hypothesis? Send a one-pager to the program manager. I've just had one yesterday where I actually don't know what the person wants to do. So I'm telling them, I actually don't understand what you want to do. Can you please write what you want to do, the objectives, the timeline, and what are the milestones that you want to achieve? Because if I can't understand it, it's not going to be a very strong grant. And I do understand that area. So you need to cater for people to understand the panel will not have all the expertise that are needed. So it needs to be, you need to help them and support them and justify why they should actually give you the money. So a clear hypothesis, clear objective, methodology needs to be cleared as well, and impact. And I go back to the fact, so what that you want to actually prove that telomere is important in this disease and the shortening rate. So what? What am I going to get out of it? What is actually the Medical Research Council, but beyond that, what is the research community going to get out of it? It's important to actually justify why you're doing it, beyond the fact that you're passionate about that molecule, for example. Case for support is actually the meat of your application. You need to write it clearly. You need to, when it says 8 pages, 11, font 11, there's a reason for that, because otherwise you'll be writing. And don't try to squish it all without any heading, because the person who's reading it is tired. These reviewers are probably reviewing it at night. These board members are looking at it while they're on their train. You need to help the reviewer understand what you want to do. Extra words sometimes doesn't help. 3,000 is a challenge, but not all of them are that. So you need to help. Just clarify. Don't put red, blue, green, and black colors. Black is okay. Everybody printed in black and white. So you're just wasting your time. Black is okay. No need for underlying and all sorts of fancy things. Just to be clear with clear headings so that we know what you're doing, and numbering where the numbering is correct with the actual figure. It's amazing where you have incomplete sentences, spelling mistakes. That could be a bit frustrating for the reviewer who has 10 or 20 applications to look at. Institutional support. It is a bit of a pull and push between the funders and the organization. We want them to put commitment, they want us to put money. We're putting money, but we want you to help us with that. So it's a pull and push all the time, where who's going to pay for what? But it really will help you when we know that there is a university or research institute that will actually support you throughout your research and after even you finish it, so that you don't end up stuck with no further funding. Resources, access to equipment, not being stuck in your own little corner, not knowing what's happening down the corridor when they're probably going to be an EM or a fluorescent microscopy just down the corridor, or you're going to have an animal facility just above your head and you don't know that it exists. Worth knowing what's around you and how you can get to this resource, because that strengthens your proposal. Abstract, write it last. Finish everything, go have a drink, relax, then come and write the abstract. That's what people look at first. That's what resonates in people's mind. And write it in a very clear and illegible way, because that actually the first thing that they read, and then they say or So you need to be very careful with the abstract. And last but not least, it was mentioned, review internally. You get a negative response, do not pick up the telephone and call the MRC or any funder and start shouting. It actually doesn't work to your benefit. We didn't make the decision. It was a scientific panel who made it. It was the external reviewer who made it. We're here to help you. Calling, crying, or shouting doesn't actually help. So take some time, whatever, 2-3 hours a day, relax, face the problem that you did not get that, and then pick up the phone and say, can I discuss further, to know from you what were the issues that were discussed. And I will say, I'm writing the review to you, the feedback to you, give me a couple of days, I'll send them to you, and then we can follow with a telephone call.
You get many distressed phone calls like
yes,
that?
I do. And they're at all levels, even professorship, where they tell me over the telephone, You may not know me, but I'm really good in my field. I am definitely sure you are. But in this instance, you're not successful. So in this instance, you need to restructure what you are proposing.
Yeah, but sometimes by the time you receive the feedback, it's gone
a month
or something like that.
Yeah, it's probably within a month. Yeah.
And then it's
you get the reviewers' comment. And the reviewers' comment, you get them after the triage anyway. And if you went to the board, then you get to respond. So you already know what the reviewer concerns were. You already responded. Your application is discussed over 15 minutes at the board. So within that 15 minutes, they're going to look at the reviewer comment, look at your answer, discuss it further. I'm convinced or not. They could be convinced. You could be scoring 8 out of 10, but you may not have made it through the list. So it's not, that month is not going to change, because anyway, you cannot come within 12 months. And anyway, you need to reconsider whether there are core issues in the proposal that need to be addressed. So that month is not a make or break, but that month you already have something to base yourself on. Other funders don't give feedback. BBSRC doesn't necessarily give feedback. They give you just the reviewer's comment. But I think we take that a step extra, because we think that there has been a discussion which may have highlighted something additional to the reviewers that is worth to discuss with you. After you get these reviews, I think it's worth making a phone call to that.
One issue I find that it's not always clearly communicated to
Juan, can you speak up so that
everybody
can hear you?
Saying that one issue that I find that is not often well communicated to the applicant who just found out that it was rejected is the size of the budget.
Yeah. The budget of the
grant.
Yes.
Sometimes grants are seen more negatively because they're too big.
Yeah.
But when you get the feedback,
it's
rare, very rare that we get that.
Yeah. Because the money.
I think there's this kind of argument. If we tell this guy, you know, this is too expensive, you're gonna say, but is it good? Yeah.
Funding is never from being since 2000 is never the reason why it's turned down. Never. I haven't seen anyone that said, this is fantastic, but it's too expensive. Okay, prune what you want. And the board is allowed to prune. I've had one say, this is fantastic, but it's not 4 years, it's 3 years. Okay, let's cut 1 year.
That is very helpful, actually.
Yeah, but what happened is usually I have the justification of resources as my last comment. I've already had a few negative up there, and that came just a bit over. So then say, and they didn't think of this, and they didn't think of, and it's not justified. So that sort of like pushed it to the area where it has scored 7 out of 10, so it's not as competitive as the best. I think if it is something really competitive, scoring 9, what they say, let's prune it and score it based on the prune proposal, and go back to the PI and say, you need to cut so and so. And usually the PI will accept, because they do want that lump sum of money and rework their schedule. However, I do encourage people to justify. Don't put 300K of travel. I've had that in a 2 million, 300K of travel. Where are you going? You're going to Birmingham. You know, you have to be sensible. Or a table for £2,000. I don't want to spend my time taking £2,000 out of a grant because it's too much faff. But you know, the panel made that comment. Why do you need £2,000 table? Or 5 laptops? What are you doing? So I think it has to be, I know the pressure that the PI has to go through, because the university may not be providing them, so they need to get them from somewhere else. But in a tight funding era, I think they are looking at everything. Because the panel, the experts like yourself, will look and say, if we cut a little bit of this, we'll be able to fund these good ones that we don't have the money for. We give the board, I'll give you an example. IIB this year has £33 million. Divided into 3 rounds.
Is that more or less the usual?
More, a little bit. Divided into 3 rounds. I don't know if I'm supposed to do that. Divided into 3 rounds. But what we do is we know that there will be a lot coming in one round than the other. We try to balance it so that we don't have proposals that score 8 out of 10. We don't have money. For these one, I do say, your proposal is very good. On this instance, didn't have enough funding. I'm not going to create a reason why actually we turned you down. We didn't have enough funding. So come back. When they come back in another round, And the annoying thing is we cannot even predict what will come through the door. We try to manage it so that we know large sum of funding is spread throughout the year. So for example, for the October board, I'm trying to ask people, which board are you coming to when they call me? Would you be able to wait until the next board? Because this coming board, we have got a lot of applications. Something like this will mean that, you have more chances there because we have a lot of funding that's coming in October. So that's why it's worth picking a phone, and because you can't get that from the website, we can't advertise it. It's something that you only can talk to someone on the phone and say, when do you want to apply and for how much, so that I know where it fits better.
The MRC centers, they come through the same cut-off.
Yes.
For example, when I had my grant rejected,
You were competing with the
I was
center.
competing with the center, and they took basically 5 or 6 million out of the
Correct.
budget.
Yeah, because strategy board has had a large cut of their funding. They took the largest cut so that they don't cut from the board when we had less money. So the center had to come. I have a center coming in October. That's why I'm trying to balance the file in a way that, we don't have people coming every day in October. Unit as well, and new. So yes, measured response, think about the reviewer, and then write your 2 pages. And an application unfocused, all the ambitious projects, what it tells you that, because we can't always write what the panel say, because sometimes it's like, how can I write that? If someone says it's too boring, they'll say, how can I translate into response to the PI? It is too pedestrian, or what is too pedestrian? So you have to, you sometimes question these panel. So it's over-ambitious. That means that within the time frame that you've given to us, it's not realistic to achieve it. Rethink about it. Unoriginal and pedestrian. That means they didn't get excited about it. That means they stuck to the aim 1. They didn't move to the aim 2 or 3. So have a little bit more novelty in it. Spice it up. That's what you need to do. No clear hypothesis. I think we mentioned this. Methodology not sufficiently detailed. I'm going to do this like that. Well, how? Because we have done it in the past and it hasn't worked. So you might need to tell us how you want to do it and how yours will succeed when others have failed. Not intellectually challenging, that's almost similar to the pedestrian. They need to be excited. They see 90 applications. They need to be excited about something. And you are in an environment that may not be the strong place to do this type of research. And the way to go about that is to collaborate with someone who does. You might be at King's might be strong with a certain area, but you know what? If you collaborate with Imperial, it could add to your application. It's challenging because people don't have time to collaborate, but you need to make that effort. Lack of infrastructure facility, we go back to the university, and then of course the training. If you're a fellow, then we need to make sure that you will get the best training where you are. For the fellowship, is the project, is the individual, is the environment. We can be a little bit lenient with the project, but if a project is going to make or break your career, we'll say come back with a different one. If your supervisor is rubbish, we can't tell you that, but we will say you don't have the right support. You might need to look for something else. We can't be offensive in our feedback. And if you do not have a good CV, we'll say you need to work on your, on your expertise in this area. So these are the 3 things, and usually a fellowship fail on one of these 3. And of course, right person, wrong project, and vice versa. You have a lot of places where you can get advice. The funders is one, your university another one, the experienced colleague within your research organization. And yes, your application is only as strong as your weakest link, because actually this is where the people will pick up on that. And this is the MRC fellowship email address. This is my personal email address. You're most welcome to email me about anything. Although I don't do fellowship anymore, but I've done them for 5 years, but I can direct you. And if you don't mind circulating the slide, I have here all the schemes that we have with their eligibility. Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Now we are going to set for a little roundtable discussion, but I'm not sure that I don't think Ghada can join us. She has
I'll be here for another 10 minutes, then I have to run.
So could I invite all of the speakers to come onto the table? It's not round, but we can sit around it. And can I also invite Esmeralda as co-chair? She has a string of very good questions to ask, I think. Perhaps we should begin by letting anybody in the audience ask any pressing question that you may have about any of this lectures, particularly in light of the fact that Ghada has to leave very soon. So if you have any questions for her that you really want to ask, I think I should let you do that now. If nobody has any questions specifically for her, then nobody has any questions specifically for her. So then I think what we're going to do is just round the number of topics that Esmeralda and I think have been interesting that have come up, and just get our speakers to say a little bit more about those particular topics. If that sounds okay for everybody. Okay, so maybe, do you mind if I just ask one question? And I know you have a lot of questions. There's a couple of things that I was very interested about in the different talks, and one aspect that I thought there was an interesting tension in the way you were dealing with rejection. So let me tell you exactly what I mean by this. I mean, there were a number of you all have emphasized the fact that one should not be scared of getting rejected. You have to expect rejection. It's part and parcel of it. You should take rejection positively, learn as much as you can from it, strengthen your future plan. But also, there's been occasionally, I think particularly Juan raised a couple of warning points along the road. I mean, there's some ways in which you don't want to fail. An early paper with a major flaw, Juan said, can kill you. There's no way back from it, he said. So there are some major warnings, right? I'd like you to say a little bit more about rejection. I mean, there seems to be a sense in which rejection is not a bad thing. We should welcome it. It can be turned into a positive, productive. But there are also some kinds of rejections that can kill you. So can you all say a little bit more about what kind of rejection is positive, what kind of rejection can kill you?
I don't see rejection as a positive at all. It's just that, I mean, maybe it sounds I made it sound a bit negative. It's just, it's part of your work. That's what I mean. I mean, sometimes you get rejection and sometimes you get acceptance. And the thing is, as we just heard, you know, even the best grants, the best people will get at some point a grant rejected. And so you just have to find a way of dealing with it. And, you know, doesn't make me a better scientist. I'm not always sure, because sometimes it's like, well, yes, you come back with a, let's say, rewritten grant addressing the issues, and the grant is more or less the same. You just, let's say, well, playing the game to some extent. You have to do it. Sometimes the reviewers have a good point. Sometimes you disagree with the reviewers, and it's just, I think, as you say, the last thing you can do is to start shouting. I mean, you just to deal with it. People have different personalities, but you have to be, you know, as a proper Spanish. Sometimes, you know, I go on, that's my reaction stuff. But then when you write these things, you cannot be in that mood. You have to be calm down and just be very professional and say, well, I may not agree with this. You can say, I don't agree with this because of this, this, and that, but you have to make a very clear argument. You have to be really sharp when you're dealing with these comments. So, I mean, it's not positive or negative. It's not always positive, I find.
No, it's not. From my point of view, what I was trying to explain is more, perhaps from the point of view of senior postdoc or somebody that's been a postdoc for a number of years. If you start to think there's no way out of things, like, you know, I'm never going to make it past this stage. You know, a lot of people think this. A lot of postdocs I've talked to, actually most of them, tell me there's no way out. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I cannot see anything in front of me, and it's really you have to be resilient and just say, I'm going to try this. If it doesn't work, I'm going to try something else. If you are not resilient, it's not going to work. Because it's like, it is hard, but at the same time, you have to take it on board. Like, that's what I meant, that you don't have to say, impossible, I'm not good enough. That's it. If you really want to do this and you have an idea, or, you really want to do this, try again. I mean, at some point, maybe you do have to give up at some point, but I think you have to have certain stubbornness as well as passion. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. There's people with brilliant ideas, but they haven't persevered enough, they will not get it.
And I think some of the reviewers comment, even if you don't agree with them, they have a point. Because even if you are given, they may have concerns that even if you get the money, these concerns will come later and you may not be publishing with it. So I think from looking at a lot of the review, most of them, there is a point there. And you may need to think about these points that they are raising. Now, you could disagree with them, but if you disagree with them, maybe you need to come with stronger justification to give confidence to the panel. Because what the panel is doing is basically, we're giving them that money to spend it on our behalf. And they want to spend it in the best possible way because they feel responsible. So they need to be convinced that that sort of work that you're doing will deliver. And I think that's the concern sometimes in their mind.
So can I ask you, from the point of view of the grant givers, how weighty can it be as a negative consideration for research project that it has been considered before and it was failed? Is that a factor against an application?
No, actually, we, especially for a new investigator, I think they always say, look, this is a resubmission, so think carefully, see what you have given them as feedback before, because we've given your feedback. So if they have addressed these feedback, you can't criticize them for the feedback that they've addressed. So I think, no, they're giving more chance. But there are people who come back with a resubmission without taking into consideration the comment, and they will fail.
I mean, if I may add on my own personal experience for the Marie Curie Research Fellowship that I have, rejection there on the first application round is extremely common. Most people who are successful get it the second time round. That's most awards are on the second time round. So you get very helpful feedback.
So I want to say one thing about reviewers. I review grants as well. So when you get grants, then you're asked to review grants. So sometimes on the other side of the argument, and you get a grant and you say, you think about it and you decide that this is not good enough. I mean, it's your judgment. And I mean, it's not your decision only as a reviewer, because there will be other reviews and there's a board. But when you're confronted with a grant to review, I mean, you've gone through rejection before and you know how it is, but still you think, well, actually this grant is not good enough. And it's your duty as a reviewer sometimes to say these things. That's why they ask you. So it's a very complex relationship, because I mean, it's your peers, it's people you feel, and sometimes, I mean, you don't review your own grants, obviously, but sometimes it's quite obvious what the weakness of the grant is. So, issues like you were saying, that making it nicely written and nicely done. So, for example, if you see spelling mistakes and you see that the grant is not, let's say the formatting is not clean and tidy or whatever, to me, it looks like maybe you are a bit sloppy. You are projecting yourself with the grant. And sometimes if I read, well, if you haven't done check for spelling mistakes or half-written sentences, to me that already doesn't look very good.
Like you don't care.
Like you don't care. Yeah. So I think that's the last thing you want to transmit to the reviewers, to the board. That's why I was saying it's the most important job. Give it to people to read. You get so much into it as an applicant. You think about it. You're so into it that sometimes you don't realize that certain things are not understood. And I really, I really mean it. If you're going to apply for grants, fellowships, give it to someone else to read it. Do not send it without having a second opinion. Give it to people with enough time. Sometimes we had, I had a colleague last year who sent me the grant 1 week before the deadline. And I thought it needed a significant amount of work. So I could find time, but basically you have to spend half a day or a day reading this, and then the person doesn't really have the time to introduce the comments. And sometimes the comment is you need to refocus this, or maybe you have to chop this, or you have to expand this. So if you do that, if you do last minute, it's not going to work. You really have to plan this, seek second opinion, as I said, of people who you trust, and they feel free to say, I don't like this, or this is not clear. It's very, very important. You cannot underestimate this.
And also, when you are trying to fill the proposal on the yes system, click all the buttons 100 times, reread, because you will miss parts. You think you filled it, but you've missed like a bit that you haven't filled. Like even when you've reread it a million.
The good thing about the JES is that when you come for further grant, your information are already done. So that's one good thing about the JES system. But it's a challenge for us as much as it is for the applicants.
Thank you. So a topic that a lot of people are interested in, I think, is teaching. Which is the path to follow to teach?
Can you repeat the question? How do you repeat?
The teaching. So a lot of people are interested to teach. So I am asking them, which is the path to follow to teaching?
Teaching at university. A lot of these reader and permanent position at the university, you have to give a certain proportion of your time to teaching. I think that's a requirement.
Yeah, it is.
But I don't know if you want to do it as a career. That's probably something different.
So I think that it depends on the expectations. So on the university or the department. So when I got my lectureship, the expectation was clearly research, and then I would have to do some teaching. And that teaching load has been growing over the years, but it's still not the majority of my time. There are all the people who, I think people mainly get lectureships after doing some research. And maybe once they have the lectureship, they can go more into more teaching dominated path. But for example, at King's, people who were doing teaching 2 years ago, they were put at risk. So, but maybe there are other universities that are less focused on research, and that might be more appropriate for a teaching only based job, or mostly teaching. So I think the institution can play a role. It's a key determinant. And for example, we criticize King's because they say, well, teaching is so important, but then the people who try to get rid of when there was less money were the people who were doing teaching. So, I do mostly research, but I understand the importance of teaching. So, but, why don't we accommodate both? But
you would say that it's a matter of university.
Yes.
You need to decide if you want to do research or teaching and to go to the right.
There are certain lectureships that from the job description that is going to be mostly about teaching. So,
in the UK, the old polytechnics that were transformed into universities about 20 odd years ago, they still have more of a teaching mission than a research-oriented mission, but the established universities basically go on research.
It really depends how competitive your research organization is.
Right.
So King's or Imperial or CCL, they want to be on the top. They want to bring research, they want to have money, they want to have a publication. So it's a balance that as well even within the department, you have certain people having more research.
Yeah, if you go to Westminster University, for example, the expectation there is probably going to be that you're going to do teaching. I don't expect you to get grants.
I just wonder who does the teaching at Imperial because I've never ever seen people dedicating much time.
It's 20% at most, 20% at most, yeah.
But the students are getting taught by some
graduate students on PhD scholarships and so on. For instance, the American system is sort of as well.
Can I have a question for Ghada? So we've been having different kinds of pressure at different time points. So 2 years ago it was the REF. and now the RUF has changed things. Does the RUF feature that your university gets appreciated? Does it get value at the MRC at some point or another? Or
yes, but I think we need to. I think this is one thing that our evaluation team at the MRC is trying to work with the RAF, because it puts a lot of pressure on the researcher to prove that they are worthy of the university. So every visit we do to the university, the RAF is top of the list for discussion. There is no solution. It's a pull and push, especially when we are introducing the idea of impact to your research, which is beyond the publication.
Yeah, so
I think that's become a problem. As I said, now we're encouraging a lot of interdisciplinary research, and interdisciplinary research does not always go in high-rated journals, because the journals as well are at the moment like unidiscipline, except from some. So that's a challenge. So we're trying to work with the university to see how they could be acknowledgement to those people who are putting extra into research that's not translated into publication in Nature or Science. So it's a work in progress, but it's going to be a longer term, because we acknowledge that. Because a lot of the case studies that we take to help us with our case with the government, they're not always in high-rated journals, but they make impact and policy change in our life every day. So how can you reward these researchers who are doing that type of work? And I think we are aware of it, still trying to find the best way that will suit everybody. It's a challenge.
Yeah, the problem as well is that the evaluation of impact is anything but accountable. It depends on the eyes of the reviewer and the environment of the reviewer, and we don't know. It is very difficult to.
I think the impact, especially for basic scientists now, is a little bit, we're trying to make it more acceptable to those people who will actually rate it. So like you're working on a very basic research, it will be good to think longer term where that basic research in 10 or 15 years will lead to, and what impact it will have on a society. Because at the end of the day, we're doing research for the love of it, but as well to have a good societal impact. And I think that's important, because the new researcher now are trying to think that way, rather than just leave me on my own, give me the lump sum of money, I'll work in the lab, and my work has no relationship to real life. That doesn't work anymore.
So I wanted to add some insights to the question you mentioned about teaching at university. I know that at Imperial College there are positions as teaching lecturer, so that 80% of your time is devoted to teaching, and 20% is aimed to do some research. So it's the other way around to researchers or lecturers. At least there is this position at Imperial.
There are others as well. There are others, but there are not too many of them.
Yeah.
Not everybody is good at teaching.
Question is that the contrast with Spain is quite obvious. In Spain, you get the lecturership position at the university, and you are not evaluated. You can rest. You can take a rest for the rest of your life.
that may change. So in Lebanon, we used to have the same thing and people used to teach and do very little research when they had the time, and then there was a shake-up. Many people lost their jobs. And then that sort of like brought the research back into the agenda for everybody. So when there isn't enough money to keep everybody for years and years and to give them pension, then they almost need to fight for that position by bringing money to the university.
Here everybody's evaluated, and when Kings went through this painful process, everybody, lecturers, professors, were put on the same criteria. How much money do you have as a grant? How much teaching do you do? If you're a professor, you're supposed to have this. If you're a lecturer, you're supposed to have less. But so basically, I could be fired next year if I mean, it's not as extreme as that. But, you know, and when I was promoted, for example, and I received my contract, I was all very excited. And this idea that you may rest when you read the contract and what they expect from you, or when you basically, you cannot say no to anything.
Whatever they throw at you, you have to say yes. Because of course they pay you more, they expect more, and it's like, deal with it. So, but I don't think it's a bad thing, personally. I mean, it's not like a university is gonna throw you away the first time you get a grant rejected. People are supportive as well.
And I think that the trick, which I was talking to a couple of people from Imperial who are at the new investigator level, and they got rejection, and they feel stuck because of the whole, probation period at Imperial. A, there's life outside Imperial. And then B, if you're banging your head in that same lab, you might need to go for other funders other than the normal. They were going MRC, BBSRC, MRC, BBSRC. The board was probably tired from seeing the application. So try to think of something else. And else is other funders like charity or being on other people's grant for a year or two in order for you to strengthen yourself to be independent. So I think you need to look at things in parallel. Like when you had your money, you didn't rest by having one program grant, you had another one on the side, because you need to do it in parallel. Otherwise, it becomes very frustrating and a lot of pressure.
I mean, I made, in response to Lorenzo's question, even in Spain nowadays, promotions are increasingly more dependent on research, and you have to have a record of having gained research projects from the ministry in order to get promoted.
The question is also that the lecturer in Spain is demanded to do teaching, to do research, to do management, but a lot of bureaucracy. So many lecturers in Spain complain about that they need to do lots of different things, and they are just evaluated by doing research. And obviously, if you have so many responsibilities to comply with, you don't have the time to have creativity to do good research either. So it's
here it's not that extreme, but for example, when you go for promotions, you have to justify teaching activities, you have to justify the research, and you have to justify also your contributions to administration. So I think you have to tick all the boxes, or let's put it in a more positive way. You have to contribute to all those areas.